The ballroom shimmered with gold light, every chandelier blazing as if to remind the world that power gathered here tonight. This wasn't just another charity dinner or routine gala. It was the night Arden and Price Investments, one of the country's most prestigious financial empires, was set to impress potential partners for what could be the largest merger in the firm's history. A deal worth over $1 billion. Inside the hall, executives floated about like royalty. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and expensive suits glided across the marble floor. Waiters in crisp uniforms served delicacies to guests too important to glance at them. But in the far corner, away from the golden glow of admiration, sat a man almost invisible to the crowd. He was impeccably dressed, his suit sharp, his tie understated yet elegant. His skin was rich and dark, his posture straight, but his eyes, a pair of deep, watchful eyes, remained distant. He didn't speak. He didn't join the laughter. He raised his hand once, attempting to signal a waiter, but when the young man failed to understand his motions, he gave up quietly. This man was Mr. Elijah Cole. To the executives, he was just another minor guest, someone who didn't belong at the high table. What they didn't know was that Elijah was deaf, and tonight, in this room filled with arrogance and pride, his silence would change everything. From across the table, two men in tailored suits whispered to each other, their smirks laced with disdain. Why did Price even invite him? One sneered under his breath. Man can't even follow the conversation, the other chuckled. Looks like he's just here for the food. Probably some diversity stunt. You know how it is. Keep the optics clean. They laughed quietly, certain Elijah couldn't hear, but forgetting one thing, the deaf see more than most people hear. Elijah's eyes flickered toward them. He didn't react, didn't frown, didn't defend himself. Instead, he sat in silence, his face unreadable, his thoughts tucked away like secrets in a locked vault. While wealth and arrogance filled the air, one man pushed a mop across the marble floor at the edge of the ballroom. His clothes were simple, his movements humble, his head bowed. This was Daniel, a cleaner who had worked at Arden and Price for years. His shift usually ended before these grand galas began, but tonight he had been asked to stay late, just in case. Beside him trailed a boy of about 12 years old, clutching a small backpack and wearing shoes a little too worn for a place this polished. His name was Malik, Daniel's son. Daniel had no choice but to bring him along tonight. Money was tight, and leaving him home alone wasn't an option. Malik stayed close, quiet, his big brown eyes wandering over the sparkling chandeliers, the waiters, the sea of elegant people who didn't even notice him. But Malik noticed someone. Across the room, his eyes landed on Elijah. The man sat in silence, hands resting on the table, occasionally moving, shaping gestures in the air, fingers shifting lightly as if speaking to an invisible friend. Malik's eyes widened. He knew what that was. "Baba!" Malik whispered, tugging at his father's sleeve. "That man? He's signing." Daniel glanced briefly, then hushed him. "Don't stare, Malik. Do your homework. We're not here to bother anyone." "But," Malik protested softly, his eyes still locked on Elijah. "No one's listening to him. He looks lonely," Daniel sighed. He had taught his son to be compassionate, but tonight was not the night. "These people don't want us mixing with them. We're just here to work. Understand?" Malik nodded reluctantly, but his gaze lingered. Elijah's fingers moved again, shaping words only a trained eye could catch. And Malik, who had spent years in a small community program learning sign language because his best friend had been deaf, understood more than a little. The man wasn't muttering nonsense. He was trying to say something important, something about being ignored, something about respect. Malik's heart tugged. Back at the head table, one of the executives, Mr. Harris, tapped his glass loudly. The chatter died down as he rose with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate not just success, but the future of Arden and Price, a future that will soon grow beyond borders with a monumental billion-dollar merger." Applause erupted. Glasses lifted. Cameras flashed. But Elijah did not clap. He did not smile. Instead, he scribbled something quickly on a notepad he carried and held it up discreetly toward the nearest executive. The man glanced at it, then rolled his eyes. "Not now," he muttered, waving dismissively. Elijah lowered the note slowly, folding it with calm precision. His silence remained, but the sting of disrespect deepened. From the shadows, Malik's small fists clenched. He couldn't believe how openly they dismissed him. As the night went on, the laughter grew louder, the arrogance thicker, and Elijah's isolation more obvious. He was a man surrounded by people, yet utterly unseen. Malik couldn't take it anymore. He glanced at his father, busy scrubbing a corner, then back at Elijah. His young heart pounded with courage and fear. Torn between obedience and empathy, finally, he stepped forward. Every chandelier seemed to freeze its light on him as he walked toward the ignored guest, a boy cutting through a sea of power like a spark in the dark. Elijah looked up, surprised, and Malik, with trembling but determined hands, began to sign. "Hello, my name is Malik. Do you need help?" For the first time that evening, Elijah's face broke into a smile. A small, silent, but powerful smile. The ballroom continued its glittering show of wealth and arrogance. Waiters weaved between tables with trays of wine, laughter spilled across marble floors, and executives flattered each other with hollow words. But at the far edge of the hall, something different was unfolding. Elijah blinked as Malik's small hands moved in the air. For a moment, he thought he was imagining it. Children rarely knew sign language, rarely cared enough to learn it. But Malik's signing was clear. Awkward, a little clumsy, but heartfelt. "Hello, my name is Malik. Do you need help?" Elijah's eyes softened. He raised his own hands, moving them with graceful precision. "Hello, Malik. Yes. Thank you. Finally, someone I can speak to." The boy's face lit up, as if the chandeliers above had poured their light directly into his heart. From across the room, Daniel, the cleaner, looked up and froze. His son was standing in front of one of the wealthiest guests in the room. Panic shot through him. "Malik!" he hissed under his breath, rushing over with his mop still dripping. "What are you doing?" Malik looked at his father with pleading eyes. "Baba, he's deaf." "Nobody's talking to him." "I can." Daniel's heart squeezed. He wanted to pull Malik away immediately. Interfering with guests could get him fired on the spot. But Elijah raised a hand calmly, signing a message. Malik translated quickly. "He says it's okay. He wants to talk." Daniel hesitated, torn between fear of losing his job and the quiet dignity in Elijah's eyes. Finally, he stepped back slowly. "Just don't cause trouble," he whispered to his son. Elijah leaned slightly closer to Malik, signing carefully. His movements were elegant, like poetry in the air. "You sign well. Where did you learn?" Malik beamed. His hands moved quickly, a little uneven but full of pride. "My best friend at school can't hear. We learned together. I didn't want him to be alone." Elijah's lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time that evening, warmth touched his expression. "That makes you special," he signed. "Kind. Not many people care to learn another's language." Malik shrugged modestly. "It's not hard if you really care." Behind them, Daniel's chest tightened. He had never seen his son so alive, so confident. Elijah's eyes grew more serious. His hands moved slower now, each word deliberate. "Do you know why I'm here tonight?" Malik frowned, concentrating on the signs. He shook his head. "They think I am a guest of little importance," Elijah continued. "But I am not just here to eat their food. I came to see who they are, how they treat people." Malik tilted his head. "Why?" Elijah's eyes glinted with a hidden weight. "Because I hold in my hands the decision they all want. A deal worth more money than this room can count." Malik's mouth fell open slightly. "You mean you're the one they're trying to impress?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, but instead they ignored me, laughed at me, dismissed me. And now I know who they truly are." Malik swallowed hard. His young mind was racing. He had just stumbled into a secret no one else in the room understood. At the head of the room, the arrogant executive Harris noticed the strange sight. A boy signing with the silent guest. He smirked and nudged his colleague. "Look at that. Our special guest finally found a playmate." Laughter rippled quietly among them. One woman muttered, "Pathetic. We bring in billion-dollar investors and he spends the evening chatting with the janitor's kid." The executives laughed, certain the moment was irrelevant, but Malik and Elijah kept signing, their world cut off from the arrogance around them. Elijah signed again, his expression thoughtful. "Malik, tell me, do you think respect is more important than money?" Malik paused, startled by the question. Slowly he signed back, "Money buys things. But respect? Respect makes people feel human. Without it, money doesn't matter." Elijah studied him carefully, then nodded. "You are wiser than the men running this room." Malik blushed, unsure how to respond. Elijah leaned in, lowering his hands. "Tonight, I wanted to see if Arden and Price values respect. So far, they have failed. But you, Malik, you showed me something different." Daniel, still hovering nearby, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, forgive my son. He means well. But please don't let him bother you," Malik frowned. "Baba, I'm not bothering him." "We're talking." Elijah held up a hand, shaking his head. Through Malik, he conveyed, "Your son is not a bother. He is the only voice of honesty here tonight." Daniel blinked, caught between shock and pride. For years he had felt invisible in this building, treated like furniture. And now the most important man in the room was praising his child. Elijah signed one last message before leaning back in his chair. "Stay near me tonight. Malik, you will see the truth unfold." Malik's eyes widened. "The truth?" Elijah only gave a knowing smile. As the evening wore on, Malik stayed close to Elijah, translating small exchanges and bringing him plates of food the waiters neglected to offer. The bond between them grew stronger, their conversation flowing in a river of silent words. But across the room, the executives grew increasingly irritated. Harris sneered, whispering to his partner, "He's wasting our time. If he doesn't care about the deal, we'll push him aside and find another investor." They had no idea that the boy standing by Elijah was about to decide their billion-dollar future. The gala's music swelled as Harris prepared to unveil the firm's official presentation. All eyes turned toward him. He raised his glass high, ready to command the room, but Elijah didn't look at Harris. He looked at Malik, and with a small, deliberate gesture he signed, "Stay strong." "You will need courage very soon." Malik's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew one thing. Tonight was no ordinary night. The storm was coming. The orchestra's violins swelled as Mr. Harris, the silver-haired executive, tapped his glass again for attention. His voice, dripping with pride, filled the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering tonight. What you see before you, this grand hall, this legacy of success, is only the beginning. Arden and Price is on the brink of a historic merger, a billion-dollar partnership that will redefine our future." Applause thundered. Champagne glasses clinked. Cameras flashed, but in the corner, Elijah remained still, his eyes watching, not impressed, not moved. Malik stood beside him, small and quiet, but burning with awareness. He knew the truth now. Elijah wasn't just a guest. He was the deal-maker. And yet, the people begging for his approval didn't even realize who sat among them. Elijah tapped Malik's shoulder gently, then began to sign. Malik's eyes widened as he read the graceful movements, then he nodded and raised his voice to translate. "He says he would like to make a statement." The room fell awkwardly silent. Executives glanced at one another in confusion. Harris chuckled dismissively. "Oh, and who might you be, young man?" Harris sneered. Malik stood straighter, his small hands clenched into fists at his side. "I'm just translating." Malik pointed to Elijah. "He wants to speak." Laughter rippled through the executives. One woman leaned toward her colleague and whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "Is this a joke? He brought his own child interpreter?" Harris waved his hand. "Son, this is an adult conversation. Billion-dollar decisions aren't child's play. Go back to your father before you embarrass yourself." Heat rose in Malik's cheeks. He looked up at Elijah, unsure. Elijah remained calm, his face carved with patience. He signed again, firm and deliberate. Malik's voice shook, but carried courage. "He says, let him listen." "This child speaks my voice tonight." Gasps trickled through the crowd, but Harris only smirked. "Oh, wonderful. Now we're letting the janitor's boy run negotiations? What's next?" Should we let the waiters decide the merger too? A few executives chuckled. The humiliation stung like a slap. Daniel, standing in the corner with his mop, froze. His heart dropped. His son's name, his dignity, dragged through the dirt in front of the most powerful people in the city. Rage surged in his chest, but fear kept him silent. Malik trembled, but his small hands tightened at his side. He signed quickly, turning Elijah's words into speech. He says, "You measure power by money, but true power is shown in how you treat those beneath you." The laughter died. A heavy silence replaced it. Harris's smile faltered, then twisted into a scowl. Enough of this nonsense. We don't need lectures from children or from outsiders who can't even communicate properly. The word outsiders hung in the air like poison. Elijah's jaw tightened. Malik swallowed, his courage wavering, but Elijah's steady gaze gave him strength. Another executive, Ms. Lawson, tried to smooth things over. "Mr. Harris, perhaps we should—" But Harris cut her off. "No, this is ridiculous. We've worked too hard for this night to be ruined by theatrics. If Mr. Cole has something to say, he can write it down like a civilized man. We don't have time for games." Elijah's fingers moved again, sharp and cutting. Malik's voice rang out, louder this time. He says, "Respect is not a game. Your arrogance is louder than your wisdom." A ripple ran through the room. Guests shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or remain quiet. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He stepped forward, bowing his head, his voice trembling with desperation. "Please, forgive my son. He didn't mean—" But before he could finish, Elijah raised a hand, stopping him. His eyes, deep, steady, spoke louder than words. He signed quickly, and Malik translated. He says, "Do not silence him. Tonight, the smallest voice carries the greatest truth." Daniel froze, tears stinging his eyes. He looked at his son, so small, yet standing taller than men in $1,000 suits. Harris's patience snapped. His face twisted with contempt. He stepped forward, looking Elijah dead in the eye. "This is absurd. You expect us to take business advice from a deaf man hiding behind a janitor's kid? You can't even speak for yourself. How can you possibly lead a deal of this magnitude?" The cruelty hit the room like a gunshot. Gasps echoed. A few guests turned away in shame, but none dared speak against Harris. Malik's throat tightened. He turned to Elijah, signing the insult with shaking hands. For a moment he wanted to spare him the words, but Elijah nodded firmly, insisting he translate them fully. Malik's voice cracked. He said, "You can't even speak for yourself. How can you lead a deal?" The silence afterward was deafening. Elijah sat still, his face unreadable. Then slowly he raised his hands. His movements were calm, deliberate, unstoppable. Malik's trembling voice carried his words into the hall. He says, "I do not need a voice to lead. My silence has already spoken louder than your pride ever will." A stunned hush swept across the gala. Harris's face flushed red with anger. Some executives looked uneasy, others furious, but in that silence something shifted. A seed of doubt had been planted in the guests' minds. Who was this man they had dismissed so easily? Elijah leaned back in his chair, calm as a king on his throne. His hands moved one final time, and Malik's voice rang out. He says, "You have already revealed your true character, and soon the world will see it too." The ballroom, once buzzing with laughter, now sat heavy with tension. Daniel gripped his mop so tightly his knuckles turned white. His son stood at the center of the storm, trembling yet unbroken. And Elijah, silent but commanding, had just shifted the balance of power in the room. The arrogant executives thought they had crushed him, but they had no idea. Elijah was holding the fate of their billion-dollar future in his hands, and the next word spoken in silence would decide it all. The ballroom air was thick, thicker than the velvet drapes hanging from the gilded walls. The laughter had died, replaced by unease. The arrogant words of Harris still echoed in the minds of those present. "You can't even speak for yourself. How can you lead a deal?" But Elijah Cole sat silently, composed, unshaken. His stillness was heavier than thunder. Beside him, Malik's chest rose and fell, his hands still trembling from translating the cruel insult. He wanted to cry, to run, to shield Elijah from the venom, but Elijah's calm gaze held him steady. The boy realized something. Elijah wasn't broken by the insult. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Harris cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. Now let us return to the matter at hand. As I was saying, this merger. But Elijah moved his hand. Just one deliberate motion. Malik immediately straightened, eyes flicking to him, waiting for the signs. The room fell quiet as Elijah began to sign. His hands moved with authority, each gesture sharp and deliberate, like strokes of a master painter. Malik's young voice cut through the silence. He says, "This meeting is over." The words slammed into the room like a hammer. Gasps erupted. Glasses clinked against the tables as hands shook. "What?" Harris barked, his face reddening. "What did he say?" Malik repeated louder this time. "He said the meeting is over." "The deal is off," chairs scraped back. Executives murmured frantically, their polished composure cracking into raw desperation. Ms. Lawson leaned forward urgently. "Mr. Cole, surely there's been a misunderstanding." Elijah raised his hand again, silencing her without a sound. His fingers moved swiftly. Malik's voice translated, steady now despite the storm brewing. He says, "I came tonight to judge character, not presentations. I came to see if Arden and Price valued respect as much as profit. Tonight you showed me who you are." The guests stiffened. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others looked furious, but none could speak. Elijah continued signing, his eyes locked on Harris. He says, "You measured my worth by my silence. You mocked my deafness as weakness. You spat on dignity while raising glasses to greed." The words carried across the marble floor like fire, burning through every arrogant smile. Harris laughed nervously, his arrogance struggling to hold. "Now listen, Mr. Cole." But Malik's voice rose over him, translating Elijah's signs with precision. He says, "Do you know who I am? Do you know whose signature you have been chasing for months?" The executives froze. Silence. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his hands slicing through the air like lightning. He says, "I am not a guest. I am the investor.
I am the one who holds the billion-dollar deal you crave." The revelation detonated like an explosion.
Gasps, cries, stunned whispers filled the hall. Executives stared at Elijah with wide eyes, faces draining of color. Daniel dropped his mop, the clatter echoing in the heavy silence. His son, his small, brave son, was the mouthpiece of the man who held the fate of giants. No, this can't be," Harris stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. We were told you were just a guest of Mr. Price," Malik translated Elijah's swift reply. He says, "You assumed, and in your arrogance you revealed your truth. Now I reveal mine." Ms. Lawson rose from her seat, her voice pleading. "Mr. Cole, forgive us. If we had known—" Again, Elijah cut her off with a raised hand. His fingers moved sharper this time. Malik's voice rang clear. He says, "Respect should not depend on knowing someone's wealth. If you respect only power, you respect no one." The room was pierced with silence so deep it felt like the chandeliers themselves were listening. Harris staggered forward, his arrogance crumbling into panic. "Wait, please. This deal, it's everything to us. Don't make a decision based on some child's words." The insult twisted in the air. All eyes snapped to Malik. The boy's throat tightened, but Elijah signed with fierce intensity. Malik shouted the translation. He says, "This child has more honesty than every man at your table. Through him my voice was heard, and through him your shame was revealed." Gasps broke out. Harris's face turned crimson, his jaw trembling. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He had been stripped bare, his pride shattered. Elijah rose slowly from his seat. His presence, though quiet, filled the room with the weight of a king rising to pronounce judgment. All eyes followed him. Executives who had ignored him now trembled. He signed one final statement. Malik's young voice carried it with strength beyond his years. He says, "The deal is dead. Your empire will not grow with my name attached. Instead, it will crumble under the weight of your arrogance. Tonight, you lost $1 billion, not because I am deaf, but because you refused to listen." The final words echoed across the hall like the toll of a bell. No one moved. No one breathed. The chandeliers glowed mercilessly, exposing every humiliated face. Daniel stared at his son, stunned by the courage flowing through him. Malik, small and trembling, had just become the vessel of truth that toppled titans. Elijah placed a hand gently on Malik's shoulder, his silent gratitude deeper than words. Then, without another gesture, he turned and walked toward the doors. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of justice. The boy followed, head high. His father, shaking, picked up his mop with tears welling in his eyes and trailed behind. The empire of arrogance had been shattered by silence. And the night was not yet over. The billion-dollar secret was out. Elijah had exposed them, humiliated them, and walked away. But the true twist, the decision of what to do with the deal, and how Malik would change the future, was still to come. The heavy doors of the ballroom swung open as Elijah, Malik, and Daniel stepped into the corridor. Behind them, the room of executives erupted into chaos, pleas, whispers, panicked calls to assistance, but none of that mattered. Elijah walked with unshaken calm, his silence louder than their desperation. Malik hurried at his side, his small steps keeping pace with the man who had just turned a room of giants into beggars. Daniel trailed behind, chest heaving, his mop forgotten in the ballroom. He felt as if he were floating in a dream, his deaf employer, revealed as a billionaire, his own son at the center of it all. "Malik," Daniel whispered hoarsely, catching up. "Son, what just happened in there?" The boy's eyes shone, but he was trembling. "Dad," I was his voice. "He told them everything. He ended the deal." Daniel stopped in his tracks. His knees felt weak. "But my boy, these are powerful men. They'll crush us for this. Do you understand what kind of world we just walked into?" Before Malik could answer, Elijah turned, his eyes soft but commanding. He signed slowly, deliberately. Malik translated. He says, "Your son is safe. I will protect him. You have my word." Daniel's breath caught. Elijah placed a hand on Malik's shoulder again, steadying the boy. It wasn't just gratitude. It was protection, a silent vow that this child would never be forgotten. Inside, panic reigned. Harris slammed his fist against the polished table. "We can't let him walk away. Do you understand what's at stake?" Ms. Lawson rubbed her temples, whispering to her assistant. "A billion-dollar deal gone. Because of you." The other executives murmured in anger and regret. For the first time, their arrogance had no ground to stand on. Harris spat bitterly. "He won't abandon the deal. He needs us." But even as he said it, the words felt hollow. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. By morning, the story had spread like wildfire. Deaf billionaire walks out on arrogant executives after humiliation. Child interpreter exposes. Disrespect in 1B deal. Silence speaks louder than power. The media feasted on every detail. Images of Elijah Cole leaving the gala with Malik by his side circulated everywhere. Analysts debated on live television. Advocacy groups praised his stance. The world was watching. For the first time, the empire of Arden and Price looked vulnerable. 2 days later, Elijah's office was filled with flowers, letters, and messages. Some were desperate apologies from Arden and Price. Others were letters of admiration. From schools for the deaf, from children who saw Malik as a hero. Daniel stood awkwardly in the corner, holding his mop, overwhelmed by the transformation. His son had been thrust into a spotlight larger than life. Elijah sat at his massive oak desk, signing with quiet authority. Malik translated. He says, "We will give them one chance to redeem themselves. One final meeting, not for their sake, but for justice." The Arden and Price executives entered the boardroom like men walking into judgment. Their tailored suits looked smaller, their eyes dimmer. Even Harris had lost his swagger. His tie hung loose, his face pale. Elijah was already seated, Malik at his side. Daniel stood behind them, unsure if he even belonged in the room. But Elijah had insisted. The silence stretched until Harris finally broke it. "Mr. Cole, we, on behalf of Arden and Price, we extend our deepest apologies. We behaved disgracefully. We ask for forgiveness." Elijah's hands moved slowly, measured. Malik translated. He says, "You don't seek forgiveness. You seek money, but forgiveness is earned, not bought. The executives shifted uncomfortably. Elijah signed again, this time longer. Malik's voice rang out steady and clear. He says, "If you want this deal, there will be conditions. First, you will publicly acknowledge your behavior. You will release a statement admitting what you did and why it was wrong." Harris's face contorted. "Publicly? That will destroy us." But Elijah cut him off with a sharp gesture. Malik continued, "Second, you will fund scholarships for deaf students. You will build opportunities, not barriers. A portion of your profits will be dedicated to those who are silenced." Gasps filled the room. Ms. Lawson whispered, "Scholarships. But that's millions." "Again," Malik translated firmly, "it is less than the cost of your arrogance." The room fell silent. Finally, Elijah's last condition. "And third, you will honor the one voice that spoke when all of you were silent. This deal will bear Malik's name. The scholarship fund will begin with him." Daniel's eyes widened. His son's name, immortalized in $1 billion contract. He shook his head in disbelief, tears stinging his eyes. Malik froze, staring up at Elijah. "Me? But I'm just—" Elijah placed a hand on the boy's shoulder once more. No words, just trust. The executives looked at one another, trapped. To refuse meant the death of their empire. To accept meant swallowing their pride forever. Finally, Ms. Lawson spoke, her voice trembling. "We accept." Harris slammed his fist, but no one backed him. Even he knew it was over. Elijah nodded once. The deal was sealed, not with greed, but with justice. Weeks later, the world celebrated the launch of the Malik Foundation for the Deaf. Scholarships flowed. Programs began. And at the center of every headline was the image of a young boy standing beside a billionaire who never needed words to speak louder than kings. Daniel, once a janitor, now walked with pride. His son had changed the world, not with wealth, not with power, but with truth. And Elijah Cole? He became a legend, not because he closed $1 billion deal, but because he turned silence into a revolution. In a quiet office, long after the cameras had gone, Elijah sat with Malik and Daniel. He signed slowly, warmly. Malik translated, voice full of emotion. He says, "The world will remember this deal, but I will remember you, Malik. You gave me a voice. And now, it is my turn to make sure yours is never silenced." Daniel wept silently, pulling his son close. For the first time in history, the worth of silence had been written in billions, and justice had the last word.